It's private property. Are you going to leave? Are you going to leave? Okay, we're both under arrest. Stand up, let's keep on civilized. Just if you pick up your bits and pieces and take those with us.
I'll introduce myself. My name is Bob Leonard. I'm one of the members of the Anti-Bases campaign. ABC is a national organization, probably most active at the present time here in Christchurch. And the focus is this base, what we call the Harewood Base, or the US Operation Deep Freeze, which is essentially a low-level but nevertheless fully functional US military base right on the site of our city.
You've made your point. You've made your point. Let's just go. Let's keep it civilized, please. Come on. Nice and easy. That's the idea. Okay. Thank you.
We live in nuclear-free New Zealand, but in fact the biggest loophole in our anti-nuclear policy and our law is this base. This base allows neither confirm nor deny US cargo military planes to fly through our city and our country. And they don't just do it once in a while, they do it twice a week. Week in, week out, 24 hours a day. There we go.
We're here in memory of the victims of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We're here to refuse the nuclear assembly line, and we join with people like Mordecai Vanunu, who's doing 18 years in solitary in an Israeli jail. We're here in solidarity with Father Carl Cabot, who's serving 5 years in prison in the United States.
Well done,
We're here in solidarity with Phil Berrigan, who's serving 2 years. We're here in solidarity with Bruce Friedrich, who's serving 15 months. We're here in solidarity with Lynn Fredrickson, who's serving 14 months. We're here in solidarity with all prisoners of peace and justice.
But we've got a big loophole, and this is the biggest one, the Harewood Base. So the protest here today is about informing the people of Christchurch and New Zealand that at least some of us know what's going on here, and we don't like it, and we want it to stop. Now, it is important to understand that the Anti-Bases campaign is not against Operation Deep Freeze. As a civilian research support organization, we've got no quibble with Operation Deep Freeze. It's the military association, the fiction that Operation Deep Freeze requires a U.S. military support arm, that somehow it's absolutely essential to have the military here. And indeed, there's been demilitarization over the last 20 years. But still, under the Deep Freeze Agreement of 1960, we've got a cover for military flights through this airport. And we say that should stop now. Involvement of the U.S. military at Christchurch Airport goes clear back to the late 1950s. The International Geophysical Year, which was an international research program in the Antarctic, started in 1957. It was an 18-month program, and it involved New Zealand and the U.S. The logistics for these programs was usually military, and so we saw in those early days of the Antarctic program, we saw logistics covered by the U.S. military. And the New Zealand military has been involved, of course, in a minor way, but most of the logistics by the U.S. And starting in about 1960, at the end of the geophysical year, the American military continued its involvement here because, of course, the research continued in Antarctica, and it's continued to this day. U.S. military involvement was essentially agreed to by the by the New Zealand government in 1960-61 by signing an agreement in perpetuity for U.S. involvement here. So essentially they're here to stay unless the military involvement is recognized for what it is. And this is one of the things that we're concerned about. It is that it is for more than Antarctic research. Now, starting about 1965, we saw the involvement of starlifters. And the plane behind me is a C-141B starlifter. It's a large American Air Force cargo plane with a very large capacity, which is the reason they use them in the early season and in the late season for carrying cargo to and from the Antarctic. Now, the starlifters have flown thus for over 25 years. In addition, more recently, we've seen the even larger Galaxy cargo planes. Now, I should emphasize that these planes are not bombers. They're not combat aircraft. They're cargo planes. But they are nevertheless U.S. military planes. And it's important to realize, as we start to focus on why we don't want these planes here, that these are the workhorses of the U.S. Air Force. They carry nuclear weapons between bases in the United States and foreign bases all around the world. The flights, which we're going to talk a little bit more about in a moment, are called channel flights. They're part of this international network using starlifters, Hercules, and Galaxies to carry nuclear weapons of all shapes and sizes and power. Now, this is one of the concerns we have. These planes continue to fly through Christchurch Airport to and from military and intelligence installations in Australia. I'll remind you that that's not Antarctica. Australia is a site of some major U.S. military and intelligence installations, and they're being served through Christchurch International Airport via these flights. These flights come through Christchurch Airport twice a week. The one behind me, the plane that's behind me, is probably what we call the Pine Gap Starlifter. It's on its way to the large National Security Agency CIA base near Alice Springs in northern central Australia. These planes, it's important to recognize, are under the U.S. neither confirm nor deny policy. It's a universal policy for all aircraft and other ships and the like in the U.S. military. So we have a nuclear-free policy in New Zealand, but this is a big loophole in that policy, and it's been going on since our law was passed in 1987. Now, a lot of people don't realize, they see these planes out here, but they don't realize what business they're on. They assume they have to do strictly with logistics for Operation Deep Freeze, or the U.S. Antarctic program. And indeed, some of the planes do. But the plane behind me is one of the planes which almost certainly has a dual role, and that's what makes the issue so complicated and why people fail to understand the military implications. This plane probably carried some gear for the Antarctic program, and the rest of the gear goes on to Australia, and some of it's offloaded and carried into a hangar for storage overnight. The hangar behind me is a U.S. Air Force hangar, and it's part of the whole scheme of things out here having to do with the starlifters from Pine Gap. They often bring pallets in which are offloaded off the aircraft for one reason or another. They're high security materials, possibly tapes from Pine Gap, from the spy satellites, tape conversations of various kinds, and they're stored inside this hangar. And they're usually under the guard of couriers. 2 couriers, they travel in pairs right on the starlifters. They go into and out of Australia and through this Christchurch base. Some of the bags are so secret they take them with them right into the motel, down at the motor lodge, the travel lodge, and they don't let them out of their sight. In the morning, they come back out to the starlifter early in the morning, load them on. Again, nobody touches those bags but the couriers, and they fly off to Australia, or if they're going the other direction, they fly off to the United States. So what I'm describing is the business that these planes carry on that year-round, that has nothing to do with the Antarctic research program. The planes fly twice a week, as I've said. They don't fly just in the summertime. We're in early summer now. they fly all year round, twice a week. Now, the reason we know this is because we have actually filed under the U.S. Freedom of Information Act and under our own Official Information Act, and we have obtained quite a bit of flight data which shows the patterns. It shows how frequently the planes come. We don't have to sit out here 24 hours a day and watch. We can actually read the data off reports supplied by the U.S. Air Force. They come in from Pago Pago in American Samoa. They fly to Christchurch. They go across the Tasman Sea to Richmond Air Base and on to Pine Gap. That's one circuit, and then back to the U.S. The other one goes around in an anti-clockwise direction and flies directly to Australia and down to a large U.S. base at Nurunga, which is also a satellite spy base, and a downlink for U.S. spy satellites. And those planes then go to Richmond and come across through Christchurch on their way back to the United States. Now, these flights, let me emphasize again, we're not claiming that they carry nuclear weapons routinely, but they could. And this makes them, the flights that come through here under the Deep Freeze Agreement, a big loophole in our anti-nuclear law. I've talked to various members of Parliament about these planes, and they claim that they are all to do with Antarctica. They deny that any of the military business is of any significance whatsoever. But in fact, it's important to realize that the planes are flying under an agreement which, at least in spirit, is only for support of Antarctic research. So the U.S. is carrying on military intelligence business under the guise of Operation Deep Freeze, or what's now called the U.S. Antarctic Program. Okay, the naval installation behind me is called the Naval Communications Section. It's run by the U.S. Navy and has been for a number of years. It's a bit downgraded from what it used to be. It used to be a Naval Communications Unit. And indeed, in the old days, in its more important military functional capacity, it had encryption devices. But the basic communications role, of course, is to communicate with the ice, with the Antarctic station at McMurdo, to communicate with the aircraft that are flying to and from the long distance down to the ice from Christchurch. So that's both the Hercules and the Starlifters, and to some extent the big Galaxies as well. The military capability here has been downgraded, but in the old days, probably going right into the early 1980s, it was alleged that this station was powerful enough, 50,000 watt transmission power, to serve as a backup to Northwest Cape, which was a huge military base in northwestern Australia, a US base, a US installation, which has since been taken over entirely by the Australian military. The Whedon's aspect of this communications unit exists 15 kilometers to the southwest. It contains, on an old Royal New Zealand Air Force base, a small base at Whedon's, a large transmission tower, and the 50,000 watt capability for reaching long distances throughout this part of the world, including all the way to the Antarctic. It was the site of several protests in the late 1970s. The large rotatable antenna was cut down a couple of times by severing the guy wires, and it crashed to the ground and was completely disabled.